of friends, or should I say plain thieves.
I'm worried I don't look anything like you, Chapman. Think of them as Russia.
You kept clicking agree.
Benny! 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 Benny!
More people getting rich quick and more poor people than ever before. I should say a reassuring thing now, shouldn't I?
Yeah, probably.
I'm still quite socially awkward.
Chat.
You miss me, right?
Because sometimes this team structure isn't flat, it's mountainous, with me at the summit, in the stratosphere, alone.
Ain't worth the resistance, lads. Don't make me do the old soft shoe shuffle.
I am so much more than you.
Better written.
Pillar of Hope.
Better written. Very cliche. Better written.
Pillar of Hope.
Better written. Very cliche. But I still felt that story was fairly boring.
That's all this year is.
You don't even have to watch it in order.
Better written. Very cliche.
Who cares?
About Doctor Who.
Series 12.
Episode 10.
The Timeless Children.
There is so much to discuss, and doing the discussing is going to be me, Neo from Australia, Ingiga from England, Code from Scotland, Tomtit from Australia, and Nate from the USA. There are so many topics we are going to talk about. We'll talk about the nature of change, mystery, infinite potential, canon, and chosen one narratives through the titular Timeless Children themselves. We'll talk so much characters and characterization. We'll talk about the paratext of the episode, the intersections with capitalism and public relations, and how the episode is being positioned. We'll talk about tone and the shape of the storytelling. We'll talk about lore, selective attention, and the 1970s serial and 1990s books that everyone is suddenly talking so much about. We'll methodically go through and talk about every defense and rationalization we've seen for the finale. We'll talk a lot, is what I'm saying. I think we should start with the big one, change, the big change. How would we describe the big change? Gig, how would you describe the big change?
I would describe it as destroying the meta-narrative of the show for the sake of something totally banal and arbitrary.
It's rather negative. Did anyone else have a different reaction?
No, but I think my sort of anger with it is, I think it's a fundamentally stupid thing to introduce. Like, I don't agree with it on any level, but what was really infuriating for me that was like being spat in the face is Chibnall, and within the episode he did the one thing that I would have begged him not to do, which was he gave us the lore drop, he told us all this timeless child bullshit, and then 5 minutes later he was like, well, none of that actually matters. Who you are now matters. So if it doesn't matter, why should we be told it? And if it doesn't affect the Doctor, if her sort of character arc throughout this episode was literally she realises that she is herself. So what did this contribute at all? Like, and I was talking about this to someone, and I realised, okay, there's a similarity, you know, with the whole Name of the Doctor arc that Moffat did, and arguably you could say it's doing the same thing, and I'm not saying it is, but you could make this, you know, for argument's sake. But the important thing is the audience learned something there, and the audience learned something that improved our view of the Doctor, that really changed how we sort of perceived them. The whole Name of the Doctor thing was the whole idea that fans were begging to know this, you know, secret name, but the point was that it doesn't matter. You know, what matters is the name itself that they chose is, you know, the thing that we should care about. That's good. I like that because, you know, it doesn't harm, you know, past lore. It doesn't, you know, destabilize anything. It doesn't fundamentally alter what we perceive of the Doctor. It just reinforces something that really people should have known already, but it does it in a way that makes us feel like we understand the Doctor better. Whereas this was just like, okay, here's all this lore, and it's not going to change the Doctor. It's not going to even change the audience's perception of the Doctor as they currently are, because it doesn't really matter. It's just going to retroactively change something in the beginning that has no bearings whatsoever on the show as it is today.
We'll get into Moffat a lot more. There's 2 interviews I want to touch on specifically, but I think what you're drawing on there is this interesting tension between two kind of rationalizations of what the show is doing here. And the first is this idea that the show was about change, Doctor Who was about change, and I'm sure we've all heard this many, many times. I'm sure near everyone listening has heard this bandied about so many times, particularly at contentious times like now or at regenerations or any format shakeups of the show. Is the show about change? Is the show about change?
No. The show changes, it doesn't mean it's about change. Change is such a broad umbrella. Change can mean literally anything. Change could mean the transition from a neoliberal regime to a fascist one, right? That's a change as well. Change is not inherently good, right? There are kinds of change that are good, and there are kinds of change that are really fucking bad. And I think if you don't make distinctions between those, then you're letting yourself in for a world of shit.
I disagree. Well, I think that the show is about change. I've decided this is the point that I'll be the contrarian on. Just because in the past the change has been forced by behind the scenes events, that is the tradition, is the changes. Whether it's the changes between doctors, whether it's the changes between even mediums of storytelling. But I think that this is just a horrid example of change. I think that what people miss when they insist on the change point is that it's the out-of-universe change. It's the change in the writers, and everything else is kind of downstream of that. This is Chibnall taking a different approach.
Tom Tit, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think this episode and this series have been very much like about change, not in so much as telling a story about change, but just talking about change and saying the word change many, many times, promising that things are going to change. But one of the truly chilling things about this episode is that it sets up the reveals in a way so that the show can just immediately get back to Revolution of the Daleks, just running around fighting monsters and maybe doing a cursory, attempt to address the lore stuff in the finale it's not willing to commit to change, and that's a big problem.
Really, my issue with it is that this is not something that is going to affect the show going forward, and if it does, Christ only knows what they're going to do with it, because what can they do? It's this issue where it is change for change's sake, but it's not permanent change. It's not change that affects, the future of the show. It is retroactively changing the past, and what's the point then? What's the point?
I think what we're all kind of circling around is there's valid arguments you can have about change and how much the show is about change or how much this episode is about change. Is it change that the show has been an Adventure of the Week show, much more so than a lot of its genre peers for, most of its nearly 60 years? Is there that much change between a 1960s base under siege in space to a 2010s one? And I think you could argue a lot of ways around that. But what Nate said earlier that I thought was interesting is that a lot of changes are drawn from necessity. Like, we can't have William Hartnell doing a show anymore. How can we keep it going, retaining the same lead character? And there's a school of thought that good changes are ones that are necessary. And I don't know, certainly a lot of them, certainly big drastic changes tend to be born from that, tend to have some kind of validity because it's not arbitrary. But on the other hand, I feel like it's kind of a box to say you can only change things when there's extenuating circumstances.
Sure.
But regarding this finale, what do we feel, if not the necessity, what do we feel the purpose or even just the potential of the change was?
Clicks.
Yeah.
Yeah, an appeal to viewers.
Attention.
I think the fact that there's so much sort of discourse over it already within media nowadays has this big thing about no spoilers, with the sort of, you remember all that stuff about the Marvel movies and stuff, and how such a big deal they made about don't spoil anyone, you don't want this spoiled for you. And it's like, okay, sure, you want to go into a film and not really know what's gonna hit you, but if knowing the big twists or whatever completely ruins the movie for you or ruins the TV show, then is it good? That's a whole argument. I'm not going to go into it too deep, but it's just the idea that if you're sort of putting all of your sort of no, actually, this is the issue with it. What's the rewatchability here? You know, if
Zero.
if the show right now, if series 12 is sort of based, all the marketing was based on this whole idea of, oh my god, this is going to be so shocking, you don't want to miss this episode. Well, that's great, but why am I going to go back to these episodes years from now? I already know Captain Jack's coming back. I already know the timeless shell reveal, and I already know all this stupid exposition. There's nothing that draws me to it.
I think you're hitting on something really interesting there, and it's that, like, of course it's totally valid to not want anything spoiled. Like, for loads of things I really like, I prefer to go in as blind as possible, which wasn't so much this series, but lots of other things. But what this, huge appeal to not getting spoiled forms is like an attention economy around shows or films that props up engagement with it, because it becomes, I have to see this thing as soon as possible, and then I can talk about it in, the select spaces for spoilers and whatnot. It's like it's a way to position, and it's a way to draw engagement. I think I would say, Gig, I imagine you have thoughts on that.
I mean, it prioritises shock value over anything of actual content or substance. I mean, all this shit about how, we're going to change everything in the show. I mean, we talked about this last week, but it's just, it's just this imagined shock value of making some ridiculous alteration to the lore of the show. And it's so insidious and it's so pathetic. And I think, stuff like the pathetic Jack cameo that ended up having no point to it and stuff like that. It's like, it's the shock value of that is now the only appeal the show can make to any sort of mass audience. Remember this, remember that, we're doing this again. It's cynical, it's pathetic, and it's disgusting. It makes me want to throw up.
I think it goes so much further than just like a lack of second watch value, because I think, and we kind of danced around this a little bit earlier, it's that there's this kind of paradox of appeal to, like, it's about change, but it's not about change. We just did a huge change, but it's not going to matter. And so much of, like, all the spoilers here are kind of based around the past. Like, it's the return of this figure. It's we're doing something to the past. It's the past is so central. The past is what we're configuring around. The Master. How does this map onto 2014 to 2017 at all?
It doesn't.
Like, we have him doing, like, the very tied plots of, you will become me if you do this, all I feel is rage and hatred and all these kinds of things. For an episode that's purporting to get, like, its potential and its impact from what it does to the past, it feels very incoherent to, like, excise out this whole narrative that we had for, 3-4 years.
On my level with you, the Doctor's relationship with Ashad the Cyberman was more interesting and erotic than his relationship with the Master in this with the Doctor in this episode. Can't get him straight in my head anymore.
He did get choked.
The Doctor pushed him down.
do you get what I mean here? That, like, by ignoring Missy, it kind of invalidates this whole appeal of, like, our climax is going to be a montage of the past, the power of the past that we're not really paying attention to, and, like, all these reveals are going to be based around something that, like, in the actual practice of the storytelling we're not respecting. Like, it really doesn't work for me.
What really gets me about the Master stuff in this episode is that even if you suppose that they were deliberately leaving it sort of uncertain as to where Sasha's Master, gets placed in the Master's overall timeline, which I think is, silly, just you might as well just commit and make it post Missy if you're going to introduce one after, because the general audience is going to get confused anyway unless you spell out for them. So, but it doesn't really matter where he comes in the timeline, because the Doctor has experienced 70 odd years with Missy, being her friend, all of this, and she doesn't act like it. And even if supposing the sort of Doctor's antagonism towards the Master is somehow because of the events at the end of the Doctor Falls, where, she thinks as things end, she thinks that Missy has betrayed her, turned her back on the Doctor and everything. That's fine. Like, if that was the sort of through line, and that's why the Doctor is so sort of angry at the Master this time around, I would get that, because it she invested all this time into the Master and genuinely believed that she'd made a difference, and then the Master comes right back and spits it in her face, essentially. I would get her being upset and angry about that if it was acknowledged in the narrative, instead of me having to assume this. And I'm telling you, they probably didn't even think about this. They just seemed to be content to ignore Missy entirely.
Yeah.
So it should, this big years of storyline should inform how the Doctor reacts to the Master, but it doesn't.
This is how audiences watch shows now, is that they expect a kind of continuity, at least of character. You know, I think people like say, well, in Classic he popped up, you know, a couple of years later and it was never explained. And yeah, he did, but this isn't the same show. Like, we can umbrella this all under being the same show, but audiences are not watching television the same way now. People are not making television the same way now. I think it's very disingenuous to treat this like it's Anthony Ainley, you know, or it's like Crispy coming back. It's not the same thing at all, and audiences aren't going to expect it to be the same thing.
At the end of the day, there's a pattern with how 13 treats the Master. In Spyfall, we had her deactivating his white face so he get put in a concentration camp. And now in this story, she's like, I'm so much more than you because I'm capable of, I'm the timeless child.
Well, it's
I can regenerate shit loads of times. Yeah, it's so fucked. Like, oh my God. It's just, honestly, it's this point where you hit a wall, where you can't try and talk about something seriously anymore, or in relation to its predecessors, in relation to Missy, the Moffat era, the RTD era, Classic Who, Capaldi, any of this, because you just hit a wall where this is just so fucking crap. It's like, what is the point? You're wasting your time.
What else what you noted about the whole sort of the culmination of the episode of the Doctor looks the Master in the eye and says she's better than him, like, that really rubbed me the wrong way. And I see people sort of portraying it as a positive, and I get it on one hand, because it's like the Master has, you know, been treating her like shit, and, you know, not that she's been great to him either. So I get I get that idea that she's, you know, finally standing up to him and all that shit, but that aside, I think given their history and given, you know, everything we know about them, it is so cynical and horrible, and I believe that, at least from what we know, that I think the Master feeling inferior to the Doctor has always been a big part of their character, and certainly, you know, with regards to New Who and how they've approached the Master in that, it's the idea the Master doesn't believe they can be as good as the Doctor, you know. You know, even just setting aside the timeless child thing just for a moment, they are, or they were, equals, absolute equals. The difference is that the Master didn't really believe that, in a sense, or believed it in the wrong way. The Doctor always knew that the Master could be better than how they were choosing to act, which is why they were, you know, trying to make them better. Whereas the Master was like, no, I can't be better than this. I am evil, I'm bad. I want you to be evil and bad and come down to my level so we can, you know, be equals down here. So the Master has always believed they're inferior, and it's obviously like a very big thing for them. So to have what is essentially the Master's biggest fear and biggest insecurity being thrown in his face like that, and it's even made sort of explicit in this episode that is his biggest fear, is because it drives him to the point of destroying Gallifrey, you know, to have the narrative suddenly go, do you know what, Master, you're absolutely right, you are less than the Doctor. So he finds this out, and suddenly it confirms all his worst fears. And then, you know, within the context of this episode, he is his last ditch effort, and, you know, putting aside how ridiculous the whole plot is and his whole, you know, motivation, you know, final thing was he wanted to bring the Doctor down to his level again, because suddenly not only is she, in a sense, better than him, as, you know, this is how he perceives it anyway, but now she is insanely better than him, because she is this, you know, chosen one. She's this godlike immortal being, you know, his progenitor of the Time Lords.
Not even through her actions, it's just through her nature, it's through her genes.
Yeah,
her race.
yeah, so... Yeah, exactly. So now it's like it's even worse for him. So he's determined to break her because he perceives this as the only way that they can be equals again. And instead of sort of empathizing with him, or even just, you know, showing any hint of this history they have between them, she just goes, do you know what? Fuck you. You're right. No, you're wrong, actually. Sorry. I am better than you. You're worthless. I'm off now. Die. You know, like, what is that? I just...
What really fascinates me there is it's preceded by her saying, like, I contain multitudes. Ruth's advice to her in The Matrix was like, you know, this doesn't define you, this doesn't inform you, this past, you're still who you are, this doesn't really matter. But it's like 13 doesn't quite agree with that. She kind of grips onto it and she's like, this chosen one narrative does empower me. It does actually make me superior. That's what she says to him.
She
am more than
defines
you.
herself by it, even though it's supposed to be, you know, not only is it based on what Ruth told us, it's supposed to not define her, but also I guarantee that, at least in terms of, you know, just the next episode, it's not going to define her in that. She's just going to have a fun romp with Jack and the Daleks, you know, and it's not going to have any bearing on her at all. So the show isn't letting her be defined by it. Ruth doesn't think she should be defined by it. Yet in that final scene, she defines herself by it. Like, it's like mixed messages here. I don't really...
Speaking of mixed messages, you know, Code, what you whole said about the show kind of validating the Master's beliefs about his inferiority to the Doctor, it seems like that's a whole pattern with this episode, but also I think with Chibnall in general, going back as least as far as Ranskorav Kolos. You've got this thing where I think Chibnall doesn't seem to really believe in any of the things that fans and other writers have taken as ethos points of the show. Like, the idea that, you know, it's about the triumph of wit and whatever over brute force and stuff like that. You know, in this episode, what have you got? You've got some shooting at Cybermen and throwing a bomb and using a bomb against the Master. You know, the Doctor doesn't manage to do anything. Like, there's no real ethos of Doctor Who in there. And with the Doctor validating this whole shit about how, oh, she's the timeless child, that makes her better as well. It's like there's just no sense at trying to latch on to the ethical centres of Doctor Who and any of the means by which it's more interesting or more humanistic or more empowering than other pop culture behemoths. It's like Chibnall just doesn't care about any of that. It's just, we're just gonna, you know, do whatever. And I just, over and over again, we get this Doctor Who, this vision of Doctor Who that's just incredibly cynical and just got this really crap, nihilistic, just ugly vision of what it should be.
What kills me about that in particular is that I feel as if Chibnall knows, like, he has the ethos written down on a piece of paper somewhere, and he writes the first draft, and then he looks at the ethos and he's like, oh, how can I sprinkle it in? Like, it is very obvious that since she, in the end, at the climax, she does define herself in terms of her past, and yet there's that whole scene with Ruth. I feel like that was sprinkled in. Like, he wrote the script and he was like, oh, wait, there's going to be a lot of people upset about her defining herself by her past. So I'll just toss in a scene where she explicitly says that's not the case, even though she turns around and acts like it a second later. And it was the same thing with, at the end there, with the bomb. You know, she has this bomb, and the ethical core of the Doctor is that, oh, they abhor violence. Right? That's not even necessarily the case. If we look back just at how the 12th Doctor handled the Cybermen in The Doctor Falls, he was gleeful, well, not gleefully, but he was blowing up Cybermen all over the place because he knew that's what he had to do. And yet
he was willing to blow himself up to stop Cybermen.
Exactly. Right. And then here the 13th Doctor is in the exact same position. Has the option to blow themselves up to stop the Cyberman, and yet because in some, it was almost a misconstrued parallel to the moment, I guess. You know, oh, the choice of blowing up Gallifrey.
Or the Delta Wave in the Series 1 finale. Yeah,
exactly. And the Doctor doesn't do it. Not because she's worried about, you know, the innocents that might be caught, because there are no innocents that might be caught. It's just herself. The 12th Doctor sacrificed himself. The 13th Doctor doesn't. And it's not out of any moral position, oh, the Master is my old friend, I want to relish, you know, I want to save him, like the 10th Doctor tried. Instead, you know, when a human shows up and is like, oh, well, I'll do it instead of you, the Doctor hands it was inexplicable to me.
She lets him die.
Yeah,
and, do you know, it's really funny you point that out, because I just fully realised these sort of implications of that scene, because I was convinced when I watched it once and never again that I was convinced that it was a case of she didn't want to blow up because it'd be like destroying Gallifrey, like truly and honestly destroying Gallifrey. But then no, that doesn't make sense because she happily lets it be blown up. You know, let some other guy take the fall, and die to do it. So she genuinely, it was self-preservation there. And one more really quick point. Gig, you mentioned this whole idea like she sort of views herself as better because of this, which is true as we've just covered. But ironically, I was annoyed at this timeless child thing because I felt that it sort of detracted from the idea that the Doctor was sort of had this issue with their sort of, they're inherently an aristocrat. You know, they have these sort of they do view themselves as a bit, you know, holier than thou, you know, at times. But the thing is, that was always presented as a character flaw before. That's not something that should be positive about them. Whereas the ending of this episode presents that as an absolute good thing, that she thinks she's better than everyone else. So I don't know what's going on with that.
She was a space cop, right? She was part of the Division, whatever that is.
Tom Clancy's The Division.
Tom, as someone who's watched a lot of classic and who's engaged with the early 60s iteration, so you know the former First Doctor quite well, what did you think of robbing him of that status? Or what did you think of... Did you think the episode did that to him? What did you think of the change as far as classic goes?
Well, the whole thing is kind of ridiculous and comical and hackneyed because, like, you map out the Doctor's history as it's presented to us now. You map it out in your mind and it's like, okay, the Ruth fugitive Doctor, she ran away from Gallifrey and presumably stole her TARDIS. And then I assume she at some point is taken back, given a chance to reset. And then the new child Hartnell Doctor eventually grows up and does the exact same thing that he did before his memories were wiped. So it's just like, it's like Gallifrey, you know, bouncing back and forth, destroyed, not destroyed, destroyed. It's like the Doctor is now, I'm on Gallifrey, I'm running away, I'm back on Gallifrey, I'm running away again. It's this ridiculous, like, cyclical idea. And it's sort of tied to this concept that Chibnall, I think the point that he's trying to make with all this timeless child stuff is that the Doctor has some certain inalienable qualities where no matter what sort of law you apply to the Doctor, they will always have an innate sort of, I mean, very literally innate in this case, like on a genetic level, but heroism and, you know, superiority or like centrality as, you know, the hero of the narrative. And that just robs the Doctor of all their context, you know, because like the Doctor is so closely informed by their sort of implied history as, you know, a highborn Gallifreyan. Except it's not so explicit that like they literally show their childhood and being born into privilege. It's just sort of left in the background because it maps onto the way the Doctor acts and behaves. So it's like mapping a sort of implied backstory onto the actual character. Whereas here it's just completely, it's saying that context doesn't actually matter because the Doctor literally doesn't remember this. It doesn't have any effect on them. And it sort of makes you wonder, you know, why does this exist? What's it all for? I don't know. You know, I'll always have Hartnell to go back to, and that is a comfort to me in this time.
Andrew Ellard made the really good point that, you know, Jack Harkness in Series 1, he's had 2 years of his memories erased, but, you know, we're not dying to find out what that was. That doesn't define him. You know, what defines him is how he's acting in the present, who he is right now. And it just seems like Chibnall hasn't learned that basic lesson about characters. We're meant to care about some shit that, you know, the Doctor had forced amnesia about, and that's now apparently the true, cool, epic origin of the Doctor. Like, I don't give a shit. Fuck.
Well, what really interests me is how this reframes. Like, you can say he lost his memory, so it's okay. Like, oh, he might have had the blue box before, but he lost his memory, so when he got it again, it's coincidence, so we've apparently preserved the sanctity and the magic of that. You can say, oh, Ian and Barbara still taught him to love humanity and to become less curmudgeonly and to become nice and a hero, because that might have happened before, but they forgot. So, you know, now it's nothing's changed. But I feel like we wouldn't agree with this, would we?
No.
Probably not.
Why is forgetting not enough? Gig, I know you have a reason.
I think when it comes to, I think stuff like amnesia and mind wiping, it's so easy, it's so convenient, and it's so destructive to character, isn't it? Because it's a point at which any sense of character as something that responds to cause and effect, something that where a character learns from experiences and is shaped by experiences, amnesia and forced amnesia, mind wipes, that's the point where that cuts off, and you can just do anything, and it's not even clear how it relates to the present, how it matters. If you make up some cope, like, oh, well, Hartnell was subconsciously influenced by his time as Ruth to, have a police box TARDIS and be the Doctor and whatever, that's terrible, because it completely undermines any sense that there was agency to that character, that there was a unique identity or journey or arc to that character. It just makes it all a really crap, lore-y thing, and just cheapens it in a very real sense.
Yeah, because what it makes it is destiny. And this kind of thing, destiny or monomyth or chosen one, magic blood, all these kinds of things are very, very traditional, and they're the kinds of things I see the show as normally pushing back against. I see the show as normally having more of a wanderer spirit, or a resistance spirit, or a fighting the establishment spirit. But what can be more establishment than a special magic chosen one who was destined to become this do-gooder in the exact tropey ways that we can merchandise and sell and whatever,
and was a cop,
literally a cop. Yeah.
The division.
Before they became William Hartnell, they were a special forces operative for basically an alien CIA. How are people okay with that? I don't understand.
I have just had a great idea. What if the entirety of Doctor Who is just one big confession dial? Okay, I'll explain my thinking, right? Okay, so we're meant to believe this is complete bullshit. I'm joking here, by the way. We're meant to believe that Ruth had the whole sort of finding the police box, stealing the TARDIS, turning it a police box, all that shit, saving the universe. And then for some reason, she went back to Gallifrey, and then she had another life, and she did the same thing over and over again. So eventually what we're going to get, possibly, maybe at the end of Chip Who, we will get the Doctor returning to Gallifrey, which is mysteriously back, by the way, to become a child again, and then it just repeats infinitely. Doctor Who can never end, because we just get the same thing over and over and over.
Well, I rather think it can end, because I think there's something materially that is ending, and that is winding down, and that is lowering, as much as we can talk in the context of. But there's something I want to do. I might as well do it now. I'm gonna say a list to you all. Hartnell is still the first Doctor because of creative mathematics. The brain of Morbius and the Cartmel master plan. If you don't like it, then you shouldn't watch it nor complain about it. It has changed before, so change is good. There is no canon, so there can be no bad lore. Someone else can change it. Whatever you think, it got people talking, so it's good. You can't judge an era until it's over. You only hate it because of diversity. If they don't remember it, it doesn't count. Hartnell wasn't written as a Time Lord, so changing backstory is okay. Regeneration was a retcon, so all retcons are okay. Moffat defended it last week, so it's okay. We can just hand-wave it away. It was fake news in the Matrix. It's an adoption story, it's an abuse story, it's a decolonization story, so it's good.
Yeah.
What do we think of this kind of thing?
Does anyone else feel like they've just been hypnotised?
We're being
ASMR recordings.
I'm starting to think Chibnall's great, actually.
Yeah, I think that convinced me. That took me over the edge.
Well, I want to work through these. So first, the creative mathematics thing. Have we all seen this where people are saying he's still the first Doctor because I can't even explain this, but I've been seeing this over Twitter. People are saying, yes, Ruth was called the Doctor, and yes, she was before who we're calling the first Doctor, therefore she's the first Doctor or a previous Doctor, but he's still the first Doctor. What do we think of this?
Yeah, my interpretation was that they were saying that William Hartnell was literally in our universe, was the first person to play the Doctor. Therefore, he is still the first Doctor. It's just that now it doesn't No,
It
I
doesn't
don't
make
think it
any
would.
sense.
Yeah.
It's like the people who say that sort of thing, they sort of don't take the like the in-universe lore to mean anything. And I don't mean that as in like, oh, you have to accept that like this timeless child was the first Doctor. It's like they just don't care. They don't see the harm in it. So it's like, why not choose to, you know, be invested in the things that happen in the show is my point, basically.
Yeah, so it's a minor bit of semantic and arithmetic handwave, basically, is what I'm feeling.
And also, like, how do we know, not that we probably ever will find out, but how does the Doctor sort of view it themselves? For example, if they met all their predecessors, you know, would they associate Hartnell's incarnation as, you know, oh, that was me originally? Or would they actively acknowledge that there was all this stuff that came before, even if they can't remember it? Like,
They make that whole point in this episode about how it doesn't matter how many of me there are, it's still me, it's all great and stuff, and that's like anathema to the whole idea of treating Hartnell as having some authority or superiority or being, you know, being the first one, which the previous anniversary specials have done, for example. Like, it seems like this achieves virtually nothing, because they say outright that, oh, it doesn't matter if there's loads of previous incarnations. It achieves nothing except undermining Hartnell's Doctor as the original.
Here's what I think. This is all a ploy by Chris Chibnall, because he's feeling that by the time the 60th comes around, we might not have as that many Doctors left. So he's just padding out the numbers, you know, because he can literally introduce anyone as the Doctor, and you can't say anything against it. So the 60th is just going to be 100, like, low-grade C-list actors just going, I'm the Doctor.
So that creative maths is like a semantic thing to set aside all those things Code and Gig are expressing about what's actually going on in the text. But regarding, in January 1976, Robert Holmes rewrote a Terence Dix script to Dix's great dissatisfaction, to the point that it was credited under Robin Bland, because Dix said this is so bland that don't put it under a pseudonym, don't put it under me. And in this story from 1976, there was a scene which was absolutely intended to have portrayed Doctors that were before Hartnell. People like to say, like, this was a gag, or, you know, it was actually Morbius's, and this is entirely wrong. You know, the people of the time have talked about they tried to hire actual actors instead of production staff to portray these Doctors. Philip Hinchcliffe has talked about how absolutely the idea was to suggest there were ones before Hartnell. And so people are pointing to this, because this is depicted in this episode. We get a flashback to it as, you know, well, they were always going to be pre-Hartnell. This was canon. This was law. This was established decades and decades ago. So what's the matter? Who was talking about that scene last year? Or the year before? Or for the last few decades? How much engagement has there really been with that scene?
None.
Yeah.
Who gives a shit?
It's like, in that story, it's probably the least, abiding idea in the story. You know, people still talk about the Sisterhood of Khan, and people talk about Morbius himself, but the actual Morbius Doctors, you know, it's sort of left out, oh, that was a strange, you know, bit of mystery and slightly doesn't jive with the rest of the show, but, you know, whatever. But now it's, you know.
The Morbius Doctors always came across, to me, as something that, for, you know, a classic Who fan or someone who spent too much time in the TARDIS wiki, it always came across to me as something that they could pull out of their hat to sort of try and inspire shock and awe in new Who fans. Go like this, oh, you don't know all this deep lore about Doctor Who. That's how it always felt to me, and it's along the same lines. And I know fandom has taken this and ran with it in other directions, but it's the same with people going like that. Oh, did you know the Doctor's name is actually Theta Sigma? You know, it's stuff like that. They just pull it out of their pocket to sort of try and shock new fans or whatever. And it's like, and that's what Morbius Doctors was to me, just like a little footnote that nobody really gave a shit about, except, you know, to try and, like, I don't know.
Yeah, well,
you know.
Yeah, Moffat has these, I'll play these now, great quotes about how the show lives in the hearts and minds of the viewers.
We also seem fascinated by the Doctor's origin story too. We get to see him leave
or
Gallifrey.
the absence of it.
And how much should be left to your imagination?
I think you have enough room to leave sort of ambiguity, leverage. That some of it can be ignored if you don't want it. If you don't want that in your personal head canon, which is the only place that Doctor Who is real, is in the head canons of the people who watch it. If you don't want that, to be the little boy, him to be the little boy in that bed, it's okay.
Yeah.
Maybe it was the master. There could be all sorts of different interpretations if you don't want that. There are things that we don't go into. He's given conflicting accounts of why he runs around the universe, and I think it's fine to add to those conflicting accounts so long as you never make one definitive. We don't do the story of why he left in the first place and what happened to everybody else. As Chris does it, in which case it's a very good idea.
The viewers are the ones empowered enough to reject certain things if they're not to viewer satisfaction, like his name being Theta Sigma, which was absolutely unequivocally the intention of the script. People say it was a nickname. In fact, Seventh Doctor serial retconned it as a nickname, but it's not, because they give his nickname in the episode as Theet. His actual name is given as Theta Sigma, and fans rejected it because that's crap. And most fans rejected Brains of Morbius. Like, speaking as someone who was watching before 2005, I can categorically say it is complete revisionist history to act like Morbius was being treated seriously by a plurality of fandom. It was not happening. Some people would talk about it, absolutely, and some people would take it seriously, but it was always a minority. And look at the actual show. Look at Twice Upon a Time, look at the TV movie, look at all these things engaging with the past. None of them were taking this one scene from January 1976 into an account when, although it was the intention, it rubbed up against the rest of the entire show, both before it, as far as the three doctors actually calling 1-1 and calling 2-2, and after it, where everyone, got on with it and ignored it. It's just revisionist history, and it's wrong to do all these articles acting like something has been solved that was left hanging from 76. When it didn't need solving, it was rejected.
Yeah, and what frustrates me so much is that it already was solved. Because in the Wilderness period, the book, Lance Parkin picked it up in Cold Fusion, where he actually featured these Morbius doctors, and it was explicit that it was like, this is a bearded doctor, and these are incarnations that the doctor has forgotten about, or whatever, and it's this big, mystery of, like, how did this work? The first Doctor is still special, because in this version of events, Hartnell was the one who left Gallifrey, and he was the one who was named Doctor by Ian and Barbara, and that's when he started going by that name. And so, he's still special, and he's still the first Doctor, but there are incarnations before that. And then, of course, in Longbarrow, it's explained that these are not actual literal incarnations of the Doctor. These are things that are in the Doctor's biodata, because he's a resurrection of the other. And that's fine. That's fine. I think that well, yeah. As Kate Orman said after watching the episode, bring back looms. But anyway, that's my rant on the Morbius doctors. I will stand by the Morbius doctors, but this is a travesty, and they should not be misused to justify what happened in this episode.
Yeah, you've seen appeals to this Cartmore master plan relating to the other, and the Virgin books about this. But what I think they're missing is, even if you take that, and you respect that and you like that twist and everything, the other isn't the Doctor. The
Exactly.
Doctor is a title. The Doctor is someone he became. Ruth is the Doctor. Ruth has a blue box. Ruth is an adventurer in space and time. So Ruth is robbing the first Doctor, Hartnell, of all these firsts. Ian and Barbara don't name him. They rename him. They happen to guess his old name.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's a totally different thing.
I think with this whole Morbius Doctors thing, I think there's a really instructive comparison between what this episode did with the Morbius Doctors and what Hellbent did with, the half-human thing in the TV movie, right? Because Moffat suggests a wide array of conflicting, interesting possibilities regarding what might be going on with the Doctor, what the Doctor's secret origin might be. Is he half human? Is he not? Is it something else? And he's open to fan speculation and just fans having fun playing with it. He embraces the messiness. Right, what we have here is a really horrible retcon, which Chibnall then pulls out the Morbius Doctors in that fucking flashback montage, which, for my my money, is the worst scene in the entire revived series. I despise it to such an extent. It is like knives across my face, right? But anyway, Chibnall pulls out the Morbius Doctors during that sequence, and it's so fucking cynical. It's like, oh, see, yeah, Morbius Doctors, guys, yeah, this justifies this terrible plot development we're doing. Yay, Morbius Doctors. It's like the polar inverse, because it's not embracing possibilities or creativity. It's just emphasizing this slavish, cynical pandering to the idea of, well, you know, you'll watch anything as long as we say it's from the past of Gallifrey or from the lore of the Doctor. It disgusts me. It's so fucking horrible.
And of course, it is just the Ackerton speech again, except that was, you know, creative and it required actual writing to, you know, bring to life. But this, I can't imagine it took Chibnall that much effort, that much straining of his enormous mind to write, oh, and the Doctor does a scrunch, apologies, and thinks about her, 55 past years of life. It's not exactly, the pating. Thinks about the pating and breaks free. It's quite ridiculous.
I got 2 points to make. First, though, I don't have an issue with the idea of incarnations before Hartnell as long as they're not the Doctor. Like, I don't care if they were originally on Gallifrey and they fell down the Panopticon steps and broke their neck and regenerated and they've had 500 odd bodies before they left Gallifrey. I don't give a shit about that. It is the idea of the Doctor that matters, and the first Doctor and everything. And I think it is ridiculous to think that they had this whole life and they just went back and forgot it all and they had to live through the same thing over and over. So, it's not an issue with incarnations before Hartnell for me. It is the whole
it is
thing.
For me.
Yeah, I know for you. But for me personally, I can live with the idea that, they had other incarnations in Gallifrey, even if you ignore the sort of arbitrary 12 regeneration limit stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not upset about that. It's more to do with the Doctor thing, because the whole Ruth idea is just absolutely ridiculous. And I've not forgotten one other thing. I always find the sort of scene you're talking about with the Matrix overloading, like, that doesn't make sense to me. I mean, not that it really matters because it's established in an audio, but supposedly the Matrix is linked to every living Time Lord and their experiences are constantly being uploaded. So, why is it a big deal if the Doctor relives her memories and, how does that blow it up? But even if supposing you don't believe in the audios and you don't believe, the Matrix is linked to living Time Lords in that specific way, and you believe that it only happens when they die, their memories get uploaded. Does that mean that the Matrix was just a ticking time bomb this entire time? That eventually the Doctor is going to die permanently, and eventually her memories would be uploaded, and the moment that happens, well, Gallifrey's just fucked. They've just lost all of their history. So...
What that reminds me of, the 11th Hour, when Series 5 had a couple of moments like this, where you get a kind of a quick flick through all the past 10 Doctors going up to Matt Smith, and that was quite embraced by fandom, I think, because it was one of those moments which felt quite rare back then, where the new series really acknowledged the past series and the history, and made it all feel like one big continuity and stuff like that. And this Matrix scene felt like it was trying to hook into that appeal, trying to really exploit the past of the series and the fan pandering as a way of uplifting whatever was going on in this episode. But it was just so terrible. It was like self-parody. It's the worst possible way they could have done it, because it's just the Doctor making some ridiculous scrunch face while we see, shit from every past episode. And it's really disgusting because it seems to elevate the existence of Doctor Who as this crap sci-fi TV show as something that's so great that it's just, a worthy pleasure unto itself. It deserves to exist just because it exists. Any sense of a reason for Doctor Who to exist has gone out the window. Just the fact it exists and it's some piece of shit that likes, that's apparently enough to justify it being glorified with these montages and shit now.
Well, this change in approach to the montages brings me to the next thing on the hypnosis list, which is that it's changed before, so it's changing now, which is good because it changed before, so change is good. I feel like we've kind of talked about that already, but it's just it's reductive crap, isn't it?
Yeah.
All change is not good. It's changed a lot, sure, but it is the most simple-minded, dull-minded thing to say all change is good. There is no... I can't even validate that stance at all. Like, what is the thinking behind it?
There isn't any. What thinking? There's no fucking thinking behind this. You know, the excuses people make for Chibnall's era and stuff like this, you know, I mean, at the end of the day, right, I don't want to go into a bit of a 60-second soapbox. We can get back to the main topic in a second. But, you know, I see people who are defending Chibnall's era and stuff. They say things like, oh, I had to stop watching when Capaldi rode in on a tank wearing sunglasses playing an electric guitar, right? If you ask them, why is that? Why was that so bad you had to stop watching the show? They don't know. You know, we're talking about viewers who don't think about their responses to the show, who don't try to articulate it or see stories from other perspectives. We're talking about people who just don't care, you know, people who just react to stuff. And I've literally lost my thread. I don't know where I was going with this, but it's so bad. And excuses like, oh, it's about change, that's where they come from, right? Yeah. People who are just on autopilot, and these are the excuses they make.
You make a good point with the sort of hypocrisy thing there, where people start watching during Capaldi's era. I can tell you right now, not that he ever would because he is smarter than this, but if The Timeless Children was written by Stephen Moffat, I guarantee you people would be foaming at the mouth with hate for it. I guarantee.
Yeah, well, what you're both getting at there is that it's a thought-terminating cliche. There's no more thought behind it. It's stopping thought. You know, it's getting to that arbitrariness of it where you don't have to think anymore because it's changed, so it's good. So you don't have to think about it. But, you know, if someone else had written it, you're changing the framing of it, you're changing the positioning of it. It's arbitrary what's actually getting praised here, because if you're not thinking about it, if you're just saying it's changed, therefore it's good, it doesn't matter what's happening because you're going to praise it anyway.
I think a lot of people have an emotional investment in finding an excuse for the show, or a way that the show can keep being something worthy of investing in. I think we've seen a lot of takes on Twitter and the like, where even people who maybe didn't like these developments or this episode, they're still saying, well, you know, it maybe opens up a possibility for some future showrunner to write a good story that works from this or builds on this. And it's like, really? What? This is what you're pinning your hopes on? The possibility that someone might make something good in future? Like, that was true anyway. People could write something good anyway. We didn't need to take a gigantic dump on the rest of the show for that to be possible. And I think it's people just having this really deep investment, an emotional investment in Doctor Who somehow being redeemable that makes them say this shit without even thinking about it.
That point on future writers, I feel like that's so not in tune with how television works right now. Like when Moffat gestures at, oh, maybe the half-human thing's real, I'm not confirming it, I'm playing around with it, you know. There's nothing to deconfirm it before, and I'm not going to deconfirm it, but I'm not going to confirm it. That means later writers can do what they want. They're not boxed in. They can go either way, or they can go no way. They can tip the line like he did. This was not tipping any line. This was flat out depicting the Citadel being raised. This was flat out depicting the origin stories. This was flat out showing us things. This was boxing us in. This wasn't a liberation. This was putting us in a smaller box called canon. This was putting us in a smaller box called lore.
Oh dear.
A future writer can't just change this because it would be mad to go and flat out contravene, you know, the whole crux point of this huge 2020 episode. People would be seen as such an asshole if they did that, even if we might very well like them to do that. You know, Pete McTighe is not going to do that to his friend Chris Chibnall. Most British writers are not going to say, fuck you, Chibs, and completely undo what is going to happen. I don't know where fans are getting this idea. That is not going to happen. That is not how the social relationships work. That is not how the professional relationships work. That is not how TV production works now. No one is going to do that. We're not in the 70s anymore.
I think fans have got this delusional idea where the show is some free spirit that can do anything, and they don't have a concept of the fact that the show is operating under a brand, and it's got, you know, expectations to live up to. It's got BBC Worldwide, BBC Studios. It's got these things that it has to try and look respectable and presentable to, you know, buyers and, you know, viewers and stuff like that, and like you're saying, Neo, stuff like a future showrunner retconning all of Chibnall. That would be a complete embarrassment. They'd never get away with that. There's a brand to Doctor Who. It's controlled, right? It has to be respectable. And, you know, this thing, you know, with the system that we have, when you have some corporation or company that embarrasses itself or does something really bad, you know, it has to try and hide that. It has to hide the fact it's made a crippling mistake, or there's been some ridiculous, you know, chaos behind the scenes, or some CEO has made a moronic mistake. You know, it's all about spinning it to try and look good. And, you know, when it comes to something that's really bad, like this this episode. You can't just, a future showrunner trying to undo it is something that you can't spin away, because that would mean acknowledging that it was shit, and that's never going to happen. So that's the problem.
The whole idea of future writers retconning stuff that happened before, this eerily similar in so many ways to what happened with Star Wars. And I'm not going to get into this too much because I don't want to start any discourse, but I see a lot of similarities between what is happening here, sort of, and even right down to the unexpected and frankly mostly unwanted chosen one narrative that we ended up getting. So yeah, and just the whole retconning stuff. Oh god. But yes, so I see a lot of similarities here, and I think it's really strange that within a very short space of time you have these two big franchises essentially making the same mistakes. And also, I was going to make the point, when you're talking about sort of Chibnall sort of breaking things for the future, it's the whole idea that what Moffat did and what Moffat did well was that he would see, Doctor Who, if we're going to use this metaphor, and it gets used all the time for writers and stuff like this in eras and shows, you've got your toy box and you've got the story stuff from all the previous years. Moffat took those toys out and he played with them for a bit and he had his fun and he told great stories, and then he put them all back, and maybe he improved things along the way and gave them a little touch up, but he put all the toys back so that the next showrunner could come along and tell his own stories, or indeed tell her own stories, but we got Chibnall instead. So but instead of putting the toys back, Chibnall has broken them. So even if he does put the toys back in the toy box, well, they're not the same anymore. Future showrunners are going to have to work with what he has presented, and it would just be ridiculous if they didn't at least acknowledge what he's written.
I think that gets onto another hypnotic point, which is that the show is no canon, so how can there be bad canon? How can there be bad lore if there is no fixed lore? What's the Nate probably has a stronger idea on this than most of us, given how much you've engaged with extended and expanded universe things. What do you have to say to this idea that there's no canon, so how can something really be bad? How can it be real?
I think that the important part of there not being a canon in Doctor Who, which is something that I stand by, and I've been leading the charge on that for years, but it's that the story has to stand on its own, is that the story has to be able to add something to what's come before in a way that's respectful, because it means that it is a sandbox, just like what Code was just saying. This isn't a franchise that Chibnall can claim that he has total and utter control over, and he invented the characters and he can do what he wants with them. These are things that other people have spent a lot of time on. These are things that a lot of people have put a ton of effort into, and it's not like the Morbius Doctors, and it's not like Theta Sigma, where we can just kind of shrug it off because it was a 30-second part of a bigger story. This is Chibnall's story, and so I think it can be judged and condemned as such. Hopefully we can all hold hands and go into a bright, bold future where we completely ignore everything that has happened since the Doctor falls. But in the knowledge that that isn't going to happen, I think that this is...
On that point of the show having no canon and stuff like that, on Doctor Who having no canon, I certainly agree with. I mean, it's it's a 57-year-old franchise or whatever. But I think when it comes to individual seasons of New Who, with any of them, you can clearly see that there's stuff that each series treats as consistent with itself and stuff that it ignores. So the Moffat era, the Capaldi era, tends to ignore a lot of the RTD era, for example, except outside of a few bits and pieces, right? But Series 9 is clearly canon to Series Series 8. So with Series 12, like, even if, say, some showrunner several years from now ignores all of this shit, we still have to suffer through however many more years of this. And for however many more years treats this as true. And we don't know how long that's going to be. And it's a complete unknown value. And it's so weird to say, well, it can be thrown out at some indefinite point in the next 10 years. I mean, we don't even know if the show will last that long. Mm-hmm. So it's such an insubstantial defense.
Well, I think there can be continuity between stories. Like, Series 8 is in continuity with Series 9. I would argue that, given everything we've already talked about with the Master, Series 12 is it's not in continuity with Series 10, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, that's an error division. Chibnall's ignored Capaldi's stuff pretty much wholesale.
Talking about the canon point is always really interesting. So I am also a big fan of the show, the series in general, not having a canon. I get frustrated when I mention stories and someone goes, well, it doesn't really count because it's not the TV show. I get frustrated with that.
I hate that.
It's so annoying, But I will make the point that unfortunately we live in an era where people are obsessed with canon, and every other major franchise has a canon, has strict rules on what is true and what is not, and and what is relevant to each story. So the general audience goes into these sorts of things expecting there to be a canon. And even if you tell them there's not, it doesn't quite compute. I've spoken to Doctor Who fans who have been fans for years and are aware of the extended universe, and I tried to gently explain the idea that in terms of like the BBC's official stance, there is no real canon for Doctor Who, and it blew their mind. It was like the fucking Matrix all over again. They couldn't handle it. They couldn't perceive this idea that you have this absolute freedom to decide for yourself what is true and what is not.
Yeah.
So, and in terms of the general audience, what is canon for them, whether we like it or not, is the show. They don't know about the extended universe. They don't care about it, So when they're sort of talking about Doctor Who and thinking about Doctor Who, they're going to accept what they see on screen as the absolute truth. They're not going to try and argue with it. They're not going to go, and if they hate it, they're not going to go, well, canon doesn't exist, so I'm just going to ignore it. They're going to go, I just hate it. It's true and I hate it, So this whole idea that people go like that, well, don't be mad about it, don't be upset because canon's not real. Well, it doesn't matter because now you've got millions of viewers, not that many millions actually, you've got millions of viewers believing that this is the absolute truth now, and not that you're going to speak to the general audience. Like, I mean, we're pretty niche in that we're all passionate Doctor Who fans, but to imagine encountering like a Doctor Who fan out in the wild who's just like a sort of casual viewer and trying to explain this whole concept to them, they wouldn't understand
Read this Paul Cornell essay.
Yeah, they wouldn't understand it. They wouldn't care for it. They see what's on the screen and they accept it. And that's just what it is. So Chibnall establishing this, it doesn't matter that we ourselves as these passionate fans can ignore it, because every other fucker who watches the show is going to believe in it. So we have to deal with the fact that all these people think this is the absolute truth. This is the Doctor's origins now. And inevitably, unfortunately, you see it now with Series 11, you see it with Series 12. A lot of the people working on this show they're not actually that big fans of it, compared to people like us, people like Peter Capaldi, people like Moffat. They're not that big fans of it. They don't know all the lore. They don't know the extended universe stuff. So the Doctor Who's future is in the hands of the people who will believe that what Chibnall has written is absolute gospel. So that is the issue with it. And it doesn't matter how many times you'll say the BBC's official stance is there's no canon. Well,
yeah,
nobody else cares about that.
I think the thing is that Moffat's quote about the show living in the hearts and minds of the fans is that that's true of the really shitty parts as well. Like, there may be no canon, but the fact of the matter is we do have memories, and I have to think about this shit. It's fine if you have like your shitty fanfic about the Doctor's origin story or whatever, but like the beauty of it is that I don't have to think about that shit. People just keep that to themselves. But Chibnall has the absolute gumption to, write a 65-minute finale about it that I have to think about. And, people delude themselves. I'm guilty of this, into thinking that they can just forget. But no, like every episode after this, whether they ignore it, whether they retcon it, whether they go with it. The fact of the matter is I have to fucking think about this absolute, travesty of television.
This is kind of permanent, and it's going to have, I think, a corrosive effect. It might not be immediately obvious. You might get an extended period of people being like, oh, Doctor Who's about change and stuff. But I think in subtle ways, maybe, even in small ways, people trying to talk about any story involving the Time Lords, or the Doctor, or the past of the show, or the meaning of the Doctor's character, the ethos behind the show, any of that, is going to have to bump into the fact that Chibnall wrote this shit, and it was a huge thing, it was a huge finale, it was a big deal, and, they can't get around that. And I think, over time, I think we're going to get people who just can't be bothered. Like, certainly I can't be bothered having any conversation about any of these topics ever again, in light of the fact that someone's going to bring up the timeless children, and that's going to be a thing. Like, why would anyone bother?
For all you say that, it got people talking, so it's good.
Oh,
It got a reaction out of you, didn't it? Have you seen that?
Strevens was liking negative tweets on Twitter, wasn't he? Like, he doesn't even care.
Our executive producer Matt Strevens was liking people calling it bonkers and people hating it and all that. And what I think that gets to is, it's back to that point about attention economies. This raises engagement. This is such fuel for people to debate. This is stuff people care about. Some people are going to love this and grip onto this, and others are going to absolutely despise this, and they're going to talk about it. They're going to go online, and the name of the show is going to keep being used, and the hashtag is going to keep being used. And so there's going to be lots of clicks happening, and people are going to keep talking about it. Why wouldn't an executive producer want that? Why wouldn't he be liking those tweets? This is great.
You know what? I'd like to see how it impacts Series 13, because it's not been doing much for the ratings so far.
That's very true. You can sketch out this PR strategy as much as you want, but when it comes to actual practice, the numbers are falling down.
And the thing is, and it's like, people will always go, oh, the ratings don't matter. They always bring up that argument when
they're falling.
Yeah, but okay, maybe they don't matter, but we can still figure out a rough trend of the, are people actually watching this? And what is really fascinating to me about Series 12's advertising is the whole thing they did was, only 2 episodes left to the finale, only 1 episode left to the
1 episode before it's 4 episodes left.
yeah. They hinged their entire advertising on this, and it did fuck all for the ratings. It did not improve things whatsoever. So, what was the point of making it all about shock value when it didn't actually do anything? It didn't benefit them. It actively harmed the show, and it didn't help the ratings.
What you're doing wrong here is you're judging this era, but it's not over. How can you judge it before it's over?
Kill you.
See, the thing with the shock value is that I think they didn't have anything else left. Like, it's not like mass audiences can really connect with, Graham or Yaz or anything like that, like they could with maybe Rose Tyler or Ten and stuff like that. There's really, I think there's a real sense of desperation here, and that sense of desperation arises from the fact that this era has been so unsuccessful in finding a niche, in really, connecting with audience and becoming culturally relevant as anything other than a bit of an awkward embarrassment. Something that we're supposed to like, but maybe don't really like. It's just really, really pathetic, and it disgusts me in so many ways.
On the point of not judging things until they're over, I think that's very dismissible. It's the same as all change is good. It's just a thought-terminating cliche, and it's nonsense. Like, if someone airs a 65-minute piece of television, I am going to judge it. You can't stop me. They aired that. They published that. It's there for judging. I don't care that there's going to be more years of this. I can judge it right now.
It's such a pointless sort of way of thinking of things, because everything constantly hasn't ended yet. Your own life hasn't ended yet. Does that mean that you can't have an opinion on what has happened in your life?
It might soon if Chibnall stays a show.
But it's the idea that if you can't judge something until it's over, then you can't judge anything at all. I just want to make a point. Also, Gig, you brought up this whole idea of cultural relevance, and I have genuinely never felt that Doctor Who is more culturally irrelevant than it has been right now. Like, even, and I know this is completely anecdotal, but even I'd go into shops all the time, and it used to be stocked full of Doctor Who stuff, and I was in one of the biggest toy stores in Glasgow, and do you know what I found? I found one singular 13th Doctor figure hidden amongst a bunch of WWE wrestler figures, like, buried beneath them. Like, that was the only Doctor Who thing. That's the only Doctor Who thing they had in the entire shop. And, like, I don't know, I just feel like, and there's not all the big events, like, there used to be, you know, I mean, this is getting a whole other thing. I just feel like Doctor Who, just people don't care about it anymore. They don't talk about
there's
it.
No Doctor Who Confidential.
There's no proms.
Yeah, exactly. It's
There's
just
no orchestra.
people don't talk about it. Even the sort of things like all these major changes they're making, and even things like Ruth Doctor when she was introduced. I mean, you had like a day of people going, "Oh my God, the first black female Doctor," you know, and making a big deal. And then the next day it was crickets. The only people that were talking about it was the Doctor Who fandom, and even then they stopped talking about it eventually a few days later when the next episode came out. So.
You know who did talk about it, and this gets onto the next hypnotic item, is the people who hated it because of, how can I put this?
Problematic reasons?
Yeah. So you often see this binary opposition drawn up that if you oppose this, you know, like we've got a diverse cast and everything, then you're alt-right, or, you know, you're a troll, you're being disingenuous. You're not a liberal, you're not a leftist. You know, you are hating diversity, and obviously that is extremely bad. And so if you are calling the show bad, you are bad. What do we think of this? You know, you only hate it because of that kind of reason. What do we think of that?
Before we go into any detail on this, I saw a Reddit post today, which was from someone who said they were a black user, and they received a lot of abuse, like DMs and stuff, about, you know, for their love of the current era of the show. People, you know, launching kind of invective at them with, you know, kind of racist kind of implications and stuff like that. And I don't want to deny that stuff happens, because it does happen. But you know, at the end of the day, I think you can't attach something like that to defense of a TV show, a product, right? Because you know, at the end of the day, I think we can all agree here, and stuff like this episode, it is quite shit. Like we have all this. Certainly, this community, this podcast has been in detail in various ways into how this era has failed on various progressive counts. Like, it's not like we want the show to be racist or anything like that, and we still acknowledge that stuff like this episode is really shit and really depressing. So it's like there should be a space, a capacity in which we can say that this show is shit, even though maybe, you know, it's done. Yeah, there needs to be space for all. Even if, like, you know, maybe you've got a first black person to play a doctor-like character. You know, I feel quite reluctant to call Ruth a real doctor, because she doesn't have that temporality to her. You know, she's a footnote, right? I mean, in this episode, she's basically the magical Negro stereotype for 13 in her vision, but that's, you know, getting off the point. Yeah, I think it's, you know, it is a thing that happens because Chibnall has provoked the whole racist faction by doing things like, you know, casting a black woman, and he's provoked the misogynist by casting a woman and stuff like that, and doing stories about India and Rosa Parks. But, you know, just because those people, those racist people and stuff like that, and old writers have said things, doesn't mean that those objections are like the only meaningful objection to the show. It doesn't mean we need to acknowledge them as a serious, you know, point of critique against the show. We can ignore all the shit they say because they're morons, they're deluded, right? There are still very valid critiques against the show, and the show is still terrible, guys.
What I think it also does, and you see this in a lot of political movements as well, is it kind of has this implication that everyone responding, or certainly everyone disliking it, is therefore, you know, like a straight cis white man. And so it's erasing everyone that doesn't fall into that dislikes it, which is like, that is sexist, that is racist to imply a woman possibly couldn't dislike this. How could she? You know, there's another woman on screen, therefore she'll like it. You know, a black person couldn't possibly dislike Ruth, but they've got the same color skin, so they'll like it. And that is like so fucked up. But that's what I feel like is coming from this disingenuous idea that if you dislike it, it's just because of, you know, your shitty politics.
Neil, you bring up the interesting point, like the whole idea. I have this really difficult, weird love-hate relationship with the 13th Doctor, because
like the Master.
Yeah, basically like the Master. How do I put this? I love the idea of having a female Doctor. I love it. I think it's great. I like her aesthetic. I like the whole concept behind it. a bunch of stuff. I like that she has a bit of an asshole sometimes. I like that they didn't, make her motherly and caring and stuff. All of the stuff I like. In theory, I am a fan of the 13th Doctor in theory, because when I think of the 13th Doctor, I inevitably think of a version of the 13th Doctor that I've built up in my head to sort of explain away the issues with her writing and just the era's writing in general. So I'm a fan of her, but I'm not a fan of of Chibnall's version of her. And it's this difficult thing where I feel so alienated sometimes because if I spend any time at all around other 13th Doctor fans, they adore the Chibnall era. They think it's wonderful. They think it's, Chibnall can do no wrong. He's absolutely wonderful. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, does nobody else realise that this is kind of shit? Are they blinded by the fact that there's a female Doctor? And of course it's a good thing, and there's stuff to enjoy about it. I try to get in the mindset. I spend so much time around people who love this era, and I don't understand it, and I'd like to. I want to know what compels them to think it is at all fully enjoyable, but I just don't see it. And that is even being a fan of 13, so it's not a case of like I have an issue with the Doctor or anything like that. Obviously not. I don't know where I'm going with this. It's just, it's like, I am proof in a sense that just having that sort of, having something that makes me happy, which is a female Doctor, and I really like Jodie Whittaker, I do. So I am proof that just that alone is not enough to make me believe that the Chibnall's era is good, So, I just don't get that mindset. I really don't.
What we're saying is that no one wants this to be better than us. Like, we have every reason for wanting this to be good. None of us want this to be bad. We're bemoaning. We hate that it's bad. We would love to be able to celebrate this like these people, but we are seeing these things and we're having these issues and we're talking about them, and they are what they are, and we're not terminating our thoughts with cliches.
And the thing is, we've talked so much about the various terrible implications that various aspects of this episode has, ethically, historically, materially, on the impact of the show. We haven't talked much about the fact that it's just a fucking shit episode. It's 65 minutes long and it's really goddamn boring, and it's hackneyed, and it's got something called a death particle in it, and it has cyber Time Lords who regenerate into metal, and it has stuff like the master, saying, "Buy me dinner," and just, it is a complete fucking pile of garbage. Like, this is the kind of, it's like, if you applied Spyfall Part 2 tier writing to a story that's meant to be important and significant and a huge lore thing, you just get narrated exposition ad infinitum. You just get this crap, and it's just so fucking bad as television, and people are so deluded about it. I just want to quickly use this as a launching pad for a rant that I've wanted to go on for ages, right? Because I think a default for pop culture media discourse for a while and the internet and stuff has been this status quo of it's okay to like things, it's not a bad thing if you like something, let people have their fandom of stuff, just let people be soft and comfy with things that they like, even if it sucks. And nominally, sure, I don't have an issue with people liking stuff, who cares? But the thing is, supporting something is actually different. Supporting something is a material act. Like, people who like this stuff are going around on social media, they're making excuses for it, they're trying to rationalize their way around it, find ways to, fit it in. Even if they didn't like it, they're trying to find ways it might be redeemable by future showrunners, right? They're doing this stuff, and, essentially they're being brand servants. They're being loyal to this brand, to the BBC, to this corporation, to this product, right? And that's where I think that is a line that anyone who actually likes the show, who likes art, who likes life, who likes storytelling, who wants good things, any of those people should be able to stop and say, hang on, this is not on. This is actually fucking bad. We shouldn't just let this happen. Because shit like this episode, that is, I think, masturbatory, totally empty fetishism, where we're made to watch something like that whole Gallifrey flashback lore sequence just because it's someone's imaginary history of a fictitious planet rather than because it has anything of worth to say, any drama, any interest, any creativity, stuff that only exists so that the YouTube upload can have the title of "We finally revealed the origins of Doctor Who," stuff like that. It is sheer, soulless, cynical trash. And the thing is, even sheer, soulless, cynical trash, you can usually ignore it, but when it sees fit to trample wantonly over stories that people actually care about, that actually meant something, that people actually have emotional investment in, that tips it over into what I think is actually evil. Like, yes, you are allowed to think it is evil that a huge corporation can push out this garbage, that every last bit of pop culture with the remotest bit of soul to it is being fed through a capitalist sausage grinder and spat out as featureless gunge. Okay, I'm done.
Wow. That was really good.
Yeah.
We're speechless now.
Yeah. Wow.
That is the point. It didn't say anything. It did not tell us anything. It was 65 minutes of pointless exposition of a storyline that was pointless. It was just pointless.
This is kind of the first time in the Chibnall era that I've found an episode like actually impossible to enjoy. Like every other episode, it does things wrong in a way where I can at least think, that's interesting on a storytelling level, like how this fails, or on an aesthetic level. But this is just so like mean-spirited and destructive of the past that like I can't derive any sort of intrigue or, pleasure from it whatsoever.
It's the worst episode of New Who by a country mile, in my opinion. I think it is the absolute worst episode of The Revival. And I think it is a strong candidate for top 10 worst episodes of the whole show. It's got no fucking redeeming elements. Like, even episodes which are ethically atrocious, like, the racism of Talons or the Amazon defense of Kablam and stuff, like, even episodes which make huge failures like that, they still have nuances, reasons you might enjoy them. This episode, there's just nothing to it at all. It's crazy.
Yeah, well, you say all that, but, Hartnell wasn't written as a Time Lord, so if they change things now, what's really the issue?
Oh.
Like, the things have been retconned before, so I don't understand why this retcon's upsetting me.
I think the absolute worst, the most irritating thing people have been saying about this is that it restores the mystery of the Doctor, which supposedly has been absent all this time. It's like, why were you watching the show before if you think the Doctor not having a backstory is equivalent to not having any mystery? It's like these fans who sort of like who watches the show as a kid, presumably, and grows up, and he's sort of a bit confused about like why the show doesn't entirely like appeal to his taste anymore. And every 10 years, the show will do like a lore-heavy episode, and someone like will say, "Oh, why isn't the show like this all the time? Why doesn't it always completely abandon its principles and tell some like trite plot? Why isn't it always like Babylon 5?" It's like,
you say that, but didn't like this episode. He went on Facebook to say that he hated it because Ruth had a TARDIS before Hartnell, a police box shaped TARDIS, and called herself the Doctor before Hartnell. So the thing with trying to pander to types is that you can indulge yourself with lore like the montage in Name of the Doctor, which loved, but you can't actually go as far as outright wrecking shit, which Chibnall does, because then types get completely turned off by that, because they want indulgence but they also want sanctity, which is why you get Attack of the Cybermen going back to An Unearthly Child and Totter's Lane. It's indulgence of the past, but it's not unwriting Unearthly Child. You see what I mean?
I think what's being said there is that all montages and all retcons are not equal, and it's just another thought-terminating cliche to pretend they are. Like that anything that shows Hartnell's face in the show must appeal to old-time fans because it's Hartnell's face. Like, the context doesn't matter. You're seeing it, again. And if we're retconning something, well, we do retcons all the time, so how can they be bad? Retcons are good. It's just all these things to stop any actual engagement with the text. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What the lore types want is something they can easily bullet point to put on the TARDIS Data Core wiki. They want something that they can write out and cite their sources on and not have to think too hard about it. They just want to be able to, like, that's basically what they want. They want to reduce it that much, to something you can just read, and you know the whole history of Doctor Who. You don't have to use your imagination because it's all written out there for you.
But
like
the twisted thing is they're saying this is liberated. They're saying this is added mystery. That's somehow confining everything into this very strict set of circumstances we literally see visually depicted is giving us more mystery. It's making things more unclear, apparently.
Do you know what I don't get with the whole argument of like, oh, suddenly Doctor Who has mystery now and infinite possibility. Like, we already had mystery because we didn't know the Doctor's origins, but also we also already had, in terms of, like, even if you take away the sort of infinite story possibility that's given by time travel and alternate dimensions and stuff, we already had infinite possibilities of Doctor incarnations because the future exists, and we already know. Russell T Davies did this in his Rose Target novelisation. He introduced, not extensively, but he referenced future Doctors, described them, and not enough detail that we could pinpoint their entire life story. It was just brief descriptions. But that right there was highlighting the possibility of introducing, other. If you were so inclined, you could introduce other incarnations, and it would work, and they would just be from the far future, and it would still be, not that really care for it much myself, but you can still do it.
What I think is happening here is it's going back to this running theme of self-cannibalization. Geek likes to talk about. It's like when a show starts interrogating itself and like saying, oh, now we can finally do stories, now we can finally do this. All it's doing is doing everything it possibly can to not actually just get on with a job and tell new stories. Like before, we could just go into the future and tell a new episode set wherever, and we could eventually just cast a new Doctor every time 3 or 4 years happens. But no, we need to do this huge, bizarre meta collapse narrative that's saying, oh, now we can finally do it, when you could have just done it beforehand. Just get on with it. Just make episodes.
See, on this thing of having like infinite past Doctors as opposed to infinite future Doctors, it links to this whole thing, which I think is quite fascinating, which is this idea of a meta-narrative, because we talked about this a bit on the last podcast, and how, erasing Hartnell's Doctor as the first Doctor kind of breaks the synchronicity of the timeline of Doctors to the story of the show, and the way in which the show has linked with people's real lives and people's real experiences and relationship with it, and how that's been represented in the show, and it kind of breaks that apart. And the difference between RTD postulating an infinite possible future Doctors and Chibnall doing this thing where we could have infinite, pre-Hartnell division Doctors that could be anything at all, but any of those division Doctors will never actually have an era, will never be anything other than perhaps a cameo, well, unless, of course, we get, a reboot which kicks off with the division Doctors. Let's assume that won't happen for now. So any of these past Doctors like Ruth, they will never be the Doctor, the incumbent, the one who actually has a relationship with the viewers, the one who's the main character of the show. They will always just be, Lore, and I think the possibilities there are incredibly limited compared to possibilities for future Doctors who could be part of the future of the show, who could be part of the part of British culture, part of the story of the show. So it's this weird transition from, I think, something with a material basis to something which is totally abstracted from anything material, something that's up in the air, something that's just lore for its own sake, something that you can't really grab onto in any meaningful capacity.
There's never been a time that Joe Martin, or indeed John Hurt, was the Doctor. That time will never happen. John Hurt was the Doctor in 2013 when Matt Smith was the Doctor. Joe Smith was the Doctor in 2020 when Jodie Whittaker was the Doctor. All these division people are never the Doctor. They're unnamed
They're just footnotes.
Cameos. They're footnotes. And that makes it all the more ugly that they're like the first, Asian Doctors or Doctors of colour to just be these footnotes, to just be these children. It's ugly.
Do you know what I just realised as well? The whole idea of having this infinite possibilities in the past. Well, there really isn't, because even if you place a Doctor and give them a lifetime in there, they don't have a future. They don't have infinite possibility of having a future, because you know exactly where they end up. You know that eventually they're gonna become William Hartnell, and they're gonna become this second Doctor and third Doctor, and they're going to go off through this. Whereas if the show was going to go down this route of wanting to introduce infinite Doctors, and at least with the future, you have the uncertainty of you don't know where they're going to end up, So why do people view it as more freeing to have this defined little era, this defined little, this imaginary era, this little box where you can sit them in, and they can't go outside that box. They can't, break those constraints. They are solidified in this tiny little pre-Hartnell box.
You know what's even worse
about
all
a
of that? is the fact that, you know, the implementation of memory wipes and amnesia into that. So the fact that, you know, Hartnell couldn't remember any of these lives as Ruth and stuff, it's basically equivalent to saying that even, you know, any of these past imaginary eras with Ruth and stuff just gets erased. Like, you know, like Donna in Journey's End all over again. Like, that's fucked up. You know, at least possible future Doctors might be part of a development, you know, an arc, a narrative, a growth, might be able to respond to past ones and be responded to in turn. But, you know, Ruth's Doctor just cannot transcend the limits of being someone who just, you know, gives a little pep talk to 13 one time, because the Doctor doesn't remember any of that shit.
Imagine one of these Doctors finding out the truth, finding out what happens in the future, and they realise that their entire life is meaningless because it will be forgotten, not just by themselves, but the entire universe will forget them. They will be erased from history. Imagine they find out about this. They would be fucking... Do you know... how is that happy? How is that good? Their life is meaningless.
That point actually kind of reminds me of like The Girl Who Waited, how you have the young Amy and the old Amy, and the young Amy finds out about this whole like terrible life that she had to live, you know, staying in two streams. And she's like, well, you can't just erase this person from history. It's like the Doctor finding out that her old lives are pretty much erased. Like, she should be outraged by this. But now the thing that gets me is that like you said, RTD, you know, hinted at future Doctors, and Moffat especially, he sort of played with the idea that anyone can be the Doctor. And Chibnall, what he's sort of done is said that the Doctor can be anyone as long as you fit within this very specific space within the show. Like, you have to be a cop. You have to be a cop. You have to have your memories erased at the end. You have to have your own costume. You have to have a TARDIS that looks like a police box. It's so
the timeless child.
Yeah, you have to be the timeless child.
It's interesting to me, Code, how much of what you said about these past Doctors, these new past Doctors being stuck in their sandboxes, and you can tell stories there, but we already know what the end point is. It's curious to me how that parallels critiques that could be made of Big Finish's use of past Doctors as well.
Ooh.
Yeah, well,
that's
for another day.
I mean, yeah, we maybe go into it a little bit now. Like, I think there is an interesting, like, that whole cottageness of it, that incestuous, I think, thing of just, you know, taking a point in the past and just milking it over and over and over in this kind of way, ultimately self-defeating way that can't really go anywhere. Chibnall's found a way to integrate that into the show itself.
I don't think it's necessarily always true. I look at the Sixth Doctor's stuff, and I don't feel like he was. I mean, his Evelyn storylines, I don't feel like that was especially like boxed in. And
the Evelyn stuff's great, but it had a limit, didn't it? At a certain point, that stopped. Right?
There are limits, but there are sometimes big gaps, like with 6 and like with 8, which, to Big Finish's credit, I think they've done some fantastic storytelling with. But where they probably won't is with the Curator, who I feel like we've been stepping around here. Because he is a future.
Doctor Who's past is ruined and its future is ruined now, and its present, well, I don't even want to talk about.
Fucking nightmare.
I think the Curator, at least in 2013, was different because, for one thing, it doesn't even seem connected to the show anymore, because he says Gallifrey stands, and it doesn't. I think it's from the future, so how does that work? But the other thing is he's so far in the distance, and there's some ambiguity about him in the script, that it doesn't really feel like anything's being locked down. It feels like that Moffat thing of, here's a toy, play with it if you want, but you know, you don't need to. And this toy is so far in the future that you can hand wave it away if you don't really want it.
Can I just say, when it comes to the Big Finish thing, I think is valid to say that there is sort of that same issue with it, but the difference is like these stories that Big Finish produce for them don't tend to really push the boat out very much. They're just very much like regular. I mean, it's like regular little self-contained episodes for the most part. You know, it's very rare, especially nowadays, that they try and sort of do something new and very, very creative. So it's more like you're just dropping a story and you're filling not really a gap that already existed, I guess, you know, rather than inventing new gaps to fill. So, you know, it's not like they do anything offensively bad with them. It's just like little adventures.
I feel kind of inclined to defend them here because they've had 20 years of honing this technique of how can we not just feel boxed in, even though we literally are boxed in by like so-and-so TV stories. How can we chart a new course when we're you know, in this box? And they've found ways to do that because they've been doing it for 20 years.
I mean, have they consistently found ways to do that? Does that apply to the recent McGann box sets and stuff? Like,
Well,
does that count as
They've done a lot of it, is my point. But Chibnall isn't even doing it at all. He just made these and put them there, and then people are going to say, oh, we have infinite potential because of these foundlings that we're probably never going to see again. So not only is he not telling stories about them, he hasn't for 20 years been perfecting how you can make it work to put stories in boxes and not make them feel boxed in. So it's a moot point to me anyway.
Sure. Gig, I think it's worthwhile to note that, for me at least, around the time that Big Finish's Eighth Doctor line kind of started to decline in quality, coincided with Night of the Doctor and the end of the
100%
time on TV.
Absolutely.
So again, going to now we have an endpoint for this character. And now all of a sudden, well, whatever. That's my own hobby horse.
No, Night of the Doctor was the worst thing that could have happened to
I feel like it's a bit unfair to blame Moffat and Night of the Doctor for the sheer uncreativity of Big Finish stuff.
It's not
Like,
his fault.
you know, they could have done anything. Like, there are ways to work around Night of the Doctor and find interesting ways to that point.
It's not his fault that they started rushing to that. That Moffat didn't do
it's
that at
8
all.
minutes long. It's a mini-show.
It's such a tiny little thing, and there is so little exterior context for it. It's a very, very self-contained little thing. So we have his sort of personality in it, I guess. But even then, I would say that his personality is a little bit closer to his earlier stuff than it is to what I know. I've not listened to all of 8 stuff, I admit.
But if we're talking 8 and Moffat, we're getting to this. I think we need a bit of a penance because we were relying on a lot of Moffat quotes and a lot of Moffat attitudes earlier. But there's one from last week to the Radio Times, last week being the week of episode 9, Ascension of the Cybermen, where he's saying...
Well, I remember watching the Brendan Morbius and just going, what?
I was disappointed when they revealed later that wasn't... I hated the fact that the next year they said that the Doctor could only regenerate 12 times. I thought I had subtracted from me all the joy of imagining those other Doctors by this bloody rule that came in. There's 2 things about canon. Is you don't want to break really important rules. Really important rules include the Doctor picking up a gun and shooting innocent people, or forgetting that he's a Time Lord and deciding he's human. That would be wrong. She's human. That would be wrong. That's just blowing apart the show. But if you can make it fit, and you can make anything fit in Doctor Who, that's exciting.
So he's defending the pre-Hartnell Doctors, and he's saying how it stole his imagination of these Doctors away. Presumably he didn't remember in the 3 Doctors how it, it says 1 is 1, 2 is 2. But what this gets to me, it's this same point I see that people like say, my 6-year-old was glued to the screen and they were really scared by the episode, so it was good storytelling. It worked for my 6-year-old. And Moffat's saying, when I was 13 or 14, I loved the brain of Morbius and it used to really annoy me how it was ignored later. So I'm going to defend it now. And I'm not saying Moffat's being a kid defending it, like that's entirely valid opinion to have, but I feel like it goes back to this kind of appeal to childhood. Like if a child liked it and it worked for a child, then it's good.
Yeah.
What do we think of that?
I mean, it's pathetic, isn't it? Like, it's a way of people avoiding it's a way of people excusing themselves from having their own opinion or really having any sort of standard for the show. Like, hey, like, my kid enjoyed it, and, great. I mean, sure, I'm happy that people's children enjoyed the episode, fine. Although I've heard other anecdotal reports of 11-year-olds not enjoying the episode. But, like, the thing is, the anecdote that your, 6-year-old kid enjoyed it is not a recommendation that anyone above the age of 6 watch the show, right? So why are you telling that to other adults? Why are you telling that to other people who are above the age of 6 like it matters to them? It doesn't fucking matter to me that a 6-year-old enjoyed the episode. I'm not 6.
And when it comes to young people's engagement, like Moffat saying, I liked this when I was young, and it took it away from me later when that happens, I feel like you can do this endless game with this show of all shows where you go, this episode took this away from this episode, so it's bad to do this. Like, he can say the Deadly Assassin is bad because of what it did to Morbius, but I can say, well, Morbius is bad because of what it did to the 3 Doctors. And then someone else, I'm sure, can say, yeah.
You could say that some kid was like really upset that Moffat got rid of the Reapers from Father's Day, right? Because they'd written loads of 1,000 pages of fanfic with the Reapers, and the fact Moffat didn't bring them back is like some horrible violence against the imagination of innocent children. It's just bullshit at the end of the day, because you're not talking about the text of the show, you're just talking about something hypothetical. You can imagine anything from from any episode. I think to a certain extent you have to like acknowledge the reality, don't you?
Speaking of acknowledging the reality, what do we think of these takes that are like, the finale was an adoption story, it was an abuse story, it was a trauma story, it was a missing memory story. It really spoke to me, and I'm sure it did speak to, these people saying this, but how do we deal with that?
I feel really weird about it, because, and this is something that Ellard made, and like a point he made in his tweet notes about the idea that you've got the first female doctor, and you use that opportunity to make her a victim of abuse and exploitation. That's weird. That's weird to me. I don't know. I guess, like, I think there's something valid in if people can see something empowering in this, if they have had bad experiences in their life, and maybe this is healing for them and it helps them, but on the same note, that's not a universal thing.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there'll be people out there who are upset by this as well. So it's kind of like
yeah, my kind of position on it is, your take on it is valid, but it doesn't invalidate anyone else's. Like, that's your personal take and what you took from it personally. I don't see that as invalid at all, but I also don't see my perspective, or lived experience of it as invalid either.
I think Doctor Who can tell stories about adoption or colonialism and stuff like that, because the whole premise of the show is that the Doctor can go anywhere and become a witness to any kind of story and stuff like that. And I think this idea that we need to make it about the Doctor, but with all these elaborate retcons and shit and stuff like that, is, I think it's kind of missing. It's kind of selling the show short. The idea that you can't tell an affecting story about the impacts of erasing someone's identity and culture through the imperialist actions of some society and stuff like that. The idea that you can't do that without making it about the Doctor and how special the fucking Doctor is just a total misunderstanding, I think, of the show. And I think it's a misuse of the Doctor as well, because it's so cheap. Like, you can I tire of it.
I think the idea that it's a story about an adoption is kind of like, it's sort of so hand-waved within the story itself, it's sort of about how it doesn't affect the Doctor who doesn't remember it. So it's like, it's extremely tricky the way it maps onto like real experiences. And but it is an extremely subjective thing.
I feel like there's a kind of almost problematic element to like saying, well, it's a story about, abuse and trauma, and she forgot her memories and she got experimented on, so it's good that she's like ignored in the story, because that's like what happens to these girls. They get ignored and everything. But it's still an episode, if you're saying it's about abuse, and then it doesn't show us any of the perspective of the young child at all. We get the Master recounting Tecteun's, life and mindset of the whole thing. We don't get any interiority with the actual timeless child as a child itself. So I feel like the episode is kind of doing the problematic thing that then you're like saying it's good because it's depicting the problematic thing existing, and like that doesn't really work for me.
The episode didn't even seem clear on what it thought of Tecteun as a person, and that whole bit where it's like, well, Tecteun went through several regenerations of the timeless child trying to find out what was going on there, and it doesn't really like offer a point of view on Tecteun there. Like it ends with the whole thing of, well, Tecteun left a little clue in the Matrix to help or whatever, and filtered the Doctor's memories as Brendan in Ireland or some shit, so we could find this out. It seems very unclear on how we're meant to see Tecteun or just any of that shit, really. I think it's very bad as any sort of take on abuse and stuff like that.
I think Tecteun has potential to be like the big bad of the Chibnall era, because I just think like, otherwise why would you give that character a name and screen time?
And say the name over and over again.
Yeah, so I think it'll be like a Doctor, meets her parents type thing, and it's like, oh, you're a bad, you don't define me, like I'm, that sort of thing.
What do you think of the idea of all this stuff with Gallifrey's New Origins, and then the Doctor working as a CIA, as a division operative, is like good because it's an opportunity to tell colonization or decolonization stories? Like, we can go through why the Doctor initially worked for the CIA and then didn't. We can look at decolonizing. So the episode's good because it gives us opportunity to tell this kind of story. What do we think about that?
It's so stupid. Like, we already have the narrative of the Doctor leaving Gallifrey and, you know, looking like, okay, the Time Lords are bad, Gallifrey's bad, I'm going to leave. Right, that's already ingrained in part of the show's DNA. You don't have to do some whole arc of the Doctor being mind-wiped and having a previous, like, 100 previous generations and being part of the not CIA that's called, you know, the Division, the most generic name possible. It's like, it's so pointless. Like, oh god, my throat hurts. This is so fucking crap, guys.
And I think the casual reveal that the island flashbacks in Ascension were meant to be like experienced by the Doctors by 13 is like, that's probably one of the biggest failures of, you know, storytelling just on a technical level that I may have ever seen in Doctor Who. That was just like a what? Because it's not meant to be a reveal. It's like they just like forgot to add some shots of 13 having, you know, visions or whatever. Or like you could have put the island stuff maybe at the start of the series and that's like the big mystery. It's like, oh, what are these visions the Doctor's having? But it's just out of context in the penultimate episode.
Question.
Ridiculous.
Why did they choose Ireland? When did they choose Ireland? Was this early on? You know, but also, do you think Chibnall's going to make this the sort of buried memories of Ireland is why the Doctor loves Earth so much?
This Ireland shit, I maintain the theory that Chibnall and Stevens planned some sort of historical set in Ireland, and they cast it. They got the locations, the budget, the cast for it. But at the last minute, Chibnall had to rewrite it all and get rid of it and make it into a timeless child bullshit. And that's why we have this completely pathetic justification for scenes set in Ireland with a ton of Irish actors. Like, it's just so random. I hate it. It verges the shit out of me. We were actually expecting something interesting with Ireland and something, at least some sort of thing with the Doctor going to Ireland, being put on Ireland, and it didn't even happen. It was just a hallucination, some fake ass shit. It was code for Gallifrey, guys.
We didn't even get an Irish Doctor because he wasn't real, so we never got our first Irish Doctor.
Possibly the only part of this that feels really well planned out is Ryan's basketball shot in Spyfall 1, and now this. It feels coherent. It feels
it's
like
his
they really
character arc, basketball arc.
I feel like I've really got a handle on the fam's characters now. Like, Riaz is brave, Graham is wise, and Ryan is resilient, and that's who they are, and that's just really great characterization.
Yaz was unusually distinct in this episode, like her striding forthright into the portal, and her even having that kind of emotional reaction to Graham praising her. It was more distinct than she's ever felt. It was really weird, but it's too little too late.
Do you think Yaz and the Doctor are going to bond over being police?
No. Fuck no. Oh, Lord.
I think, if Yaz telling Graham that he's a good human, if that's a supposed love letter because she's from Yorkshire, then, like, what is her telling the Doctor that she's the best person she's ever met? Like, is that a marriage proposal?
They held hands.
Oh my god!
Yeah.
I was so shocked by so the whole sort of goodbye scene when Yaz is the only one that tries to stop the Doctor, and there was this really extended shot of the Doctor leaving, and like focused on Yaz just standing there like mute, and it's like I was fully expecting her to shout like "I love you" or something, you know, or just like, you know, do something, or like run after the Doctor, hug her, you know, something like that. You know, she just stood there and just let the Doctor walk to her death. And then we later find that the fam tried to stop Kosharmus from going to his death. And then they were just... They didn't make an effort with the Doctor, but apparently Kosharmus was worth saving. Oh god.
Kosharmus, the man who earlier in the episode expressed that he has no fear of dying whatsoever. He's actually ready to sacrifice himself. And then guess what? In the end, he does sacrifice himself. It's just mind-blowing storytelling. He does the thing that he said he was going to do. Yeah.
I mean, the Doctor lets Kosharmus die, doesn't she? I mean, that's the whole... I mean, people have raised this ethical issue with the episode, and the way in which it compares unfavourably to, say, Ten sacrificing himself for Wilf. For example, the idea that the Doctor would give their lives to save even one ordinary person, that's gone out the window now, hasn't it? Now it's ordinary people giving their lives to spare the Doctor from blowing themselves up. And in this case, it's because of that contrivance that Kosharmus just randomly says, oh, by the way, I was part of the Alliance that sent the Cyberium back in time, so I deserve to die. Like, it's just complete, most contrived, random pile of shit I've ever seen.
Gig, you're forgetting the Doctor is better than all of us. She's so much more than a regular little human, so of course Ko-Sharmus has to die for her.
Ko-Sharmus is another timeless child? Like, it's possible, isn't it? Any character could be a fucking timeless child at this
He's
point.
back in series 13.
There's space for all.
Why this is like slightly unrelated, but why is the Master so angsty about having, you know, regeneration cooties from the Doctor when, like, all throughout the classic series, he was trying to steal the Doctor's regenerations anyway, like TV movie, trying to steal his body. Like, the Master, above all things, is preoccupied with, you know, prolonging his life. It doesn't gel with any version of the Master, except maybe Sim, but even then, like, come on.
It's ironic that given the Master has the most dialogue in this episode, the Master is just constantly talking in this episode. It seems almost like Chibnall's more interested in writing the Master than the Doctor. That the Master doesn't really have anything resembling coherent motivations. He's just doing random shit at the end of the day. Like, oh, I hate you, Doctor. Oh, I'm going to blow up Gallifrey because I hate the Doctor so much. And it's really a symptom of how corrosive and toxic it is to make the Doctor the centre of the mythology. It's just so bad for every other element of the show.
Good point about the Master always wanting to prolong his life, because this is also the episode where it is established that the Master is suicidal. So, why is that? Is it because he is angry about the Doctor apparently being proven superior to him in some way? Again, I feel like there should have been some sort of catharsis and, like, the Doctor, you know, not affirming those fears. But you know what? I will give Sasha credit. With what he was given, he really gave it his all. I think he is so charming. He is a really, really good actor. The times that we did get the opportunity to see depth for the Master, he really sold us on that, or sold me on it at least. I feel like if he'd been given a deep storyline, for example, like Missy, something introspective, then I think he could have pulled it off and done so extremely well. It is a crying shame that all he was given was Saturday morning cartoon villain in this, because the Master deserves so much more than that, but Sasha deserves so much more than that.
See, Sasha was hyping up before this episode there. Sasha was going on about how there's a development for the Master in this episode that people might not like. He was worried about people turning on him because of how dark this episode got with the Master. And if all that was the fact that the Master kind of dares the Doctor to kill him with a death particle, and he's a bit disappointed that miniaturizing a Shad didn't blow him up with a death particle. And, like, to be fair, those bits are well acted on Sasha's part. But if that's what we consider, like, interesting characterization now, like, it's just such a pittance.
There's something kind of insidious about the fact that, like, this Master, his primary character trait as a villain is that he is outraged at an injustice that he finds out about. It's sort of like part of this Chibnall regime's tendency to sort of despise activists. You know, it's the old Kablam thing of, like, you know, the activist is the villain, and the Master is sort of the only one who really has a developed reaction to the Timeless Child stuff, and that makes him the villain. It's all extremely odd, the way it's played.
The Master's the only one in this episode who has any sort of motivation. I mean, what are the Cybermen trying to do here? Become magic glowing Cybermen? Or trying to make themselves into robots? Like, it was so weird. Like, the Cybermen in this episode, it's like Chibnall doesn't really, like, rate them as characters or villains at all, and he made that very explicit with the Master dressing them down for how stupid their plan was. And it's like, I mean, Chibnall, you didn't have to write this, you know? You didn't have to do this.
And a Shad died so quick, so suddenly, written out completely, used as a plot device, which is ridiculous. I will give them something. I know people hate them, but the Cyber Time Lords are really cute. But yeah. They were cute in a way that I would be amused to see them in one of the frankly ridiculous Titan comics storylines, Supremacy of the Cybermen. Not that they had those designs in them, but that's essentially what we've got here, that sort of storyline. So I would be amused to see them in that, but it's not something we should have had on the show. Like, it's just so, the concept is just so stupid. Death Particle was dumb. Was dumb. Like, the fact that this is just a convenient plot device to give the Doctor the button to hand to someone else to solve the plot, which happens all the time in Chibnall's era. There's just a convenient thing there, a MacGuffin that they can use to solve things within a minute, so they don't have to deal with any consequences. You know, it happened sort of in Spyfall as well, where, like, although that was and I was going to say it's worse. It's about the same. The thing that solves the plot is created or happens off screen, and then it's just a case of the Doctor going, "Haha, I have solved the plot now." You know, it is so completely pointless. It's so soulless. There's no intrigue. There's no interest in the plot. It is just exposition after exposition constantly, and this was the worst example of it so far.
The death particle is so weird. You could have introduced the death particle in any of the previous 2 episodes. Like, episode 8 would have made perfect sense to introduce the death particle then. But you just get in this episode, like, 10 minutes before it comes up, oh, there's a myth of the death particle in the Cyberman.
It could have been the Cyberium, because what did the Cyberium really do? Nothing. Nothing. Why couldn't the Cyberium...
It bought the master dinner! That was about it.
Exactly. Why can't the Cyberium just be the death particle? You know, just combine the 2 into 1, and it would still be stupid, but at least we would have been introduced to it before. So, oh god, it's a mess.
How come Chibnall's previous show was about a child that fell off a cliff and then cops, and now the Doctor is a child who fell off a cliff and then a cop?
Oh god.
It's like poetry, it rhymes.
The thing is, in this episode, we get visual depictions of all the Doctors, you know, growing up on Gallifrey and the start of that society. It's like we practically get everything except the Doctor's name. And my question is, why not? Why not just reveal the Doctor's name here? It's like Tecteun presumably gave her a name. That would be as desanctifying to the mystery of the Doctor as anything we get in this episode. But I guarantee you...
Minecraft shot of the Citadel being built from scratch.
Oh my god.
The mystery is now Doctor what race, not Doctor Who.
Yeah, she's not Shobogan anymore, apparently. Oh my god, the Shobogan thing is so... I think the Shobogan thing actually typifies the Chibnall era. Because obviously, as originally introduced, and as interpreted after that point, the Shobogans are kind of like a countercultural thing. Like a bit like a kind of rebellious sect on Gallifrey, like the Shobogans. They have graffiti and stuff. They kind of rebel against the Time Lords and things like that. But to Chibnall, they're just lore. They're just the species before there were Time Lords. Oh, they're all Shobogans now. There's no interesting faction to it. There's no fighting the power to it. They're just, we don't understand anything. We're just going to throw it into the script and take the fun out of everything. It's terrible.
I think if they happened to reveal the Doctor's name in this story, there would be people coming out of the woodwork and they would say, oh, revealing the Doctor's name actually adds so much mystery to the character. Like, what is the etymology of this fictional word? You know,
her name.
What is the name of the planet?
Her name was Umsang.
Can I ask here at the end? I'll go around in a circle. Actually, Nate, who is the first Doctor?
Oh. Well, Hartnell, but I have to say that I still cling to the first Doctor is a human in my mind. I'll say that. And so
that's interesting.
If that's the direction that that Chibnall goes with, maybe the Timeless Child is a human like River Song. After all, the whole explanation we got for River's regenerative abilities was that she was exposed to the time vortex, and that's how Time Lords got their regeneration powers. But now it turns out that is entirely not the case. So clearly she has a little Timeless Child in her somewhere, either because Rory is, well, I won't speculate, but yeah, so
Rory is the master.
Perfect.
Tomtit, who is the first Doctor?
This is very sentimental of me, but I think I would say Verity Lambert for creating this wonderful show and embodying all the traits that I think the Doctor represents and should represent.
Code, who is the first Doctor?
I think the first Doctor was obviously William Hartnell. I don't have an interesting answer for you. I'm really sorry.
You did have to go third. That is a little
I
rigged.
was gonna try and very, very quickly Google who one of the most early medical practitioners were and try and give you a name, but I didn't
Dr.
have
D, the necromancer.
I didn't have the time, and someone probably fact checked me.
It's Dr. Phil.
Dr. Phil is the first Doctor. I'll go with that.
Gig, who is the first Doctor?
I mean, the first Doctor is very obviously Christopher Eccleston, and David Tennant's the second one, and Matt Smith's the third one. I don't know what you guys have been talking about for the past 2 hours, but, clearly this is the only show there ever was. Unfortunately, it ended in 2017, so it's a nice, small 10-season show. Yeah, well, I'm happy to go forward with that.
I'll corroborate the William Hartnell myself.
Come on, ask me why I did this.
Why did you do this?
Not telling you. Don't mean to conversion shame you.
Wow. That was quick. Well, at least my eagle. Oh! I did it! In the hoop! Swish!
I am so much more than you.
Better written.
Pillar of Hope.
Better written. Very cliche. Better written.
Pillar of Hope.
Better written. Very cliche. Better written.
Pillar of Hope.
Better written. Very cliche. Better written.
Pillar of Hope.
Better written. Very cliche. But I still felt that story was fairly boring.
That's all this year is. You don't even have to watch it in order.
Better written. Very cliche.